Well, no, I go back to the curious thing. When you talk about something, we tend to access it. And I'm having you talk about successful motivation strategies. You might have found, as you went around to your groups, that you were getting more motivated. Yes, it's kind of an interesting way to get a change process going. Now, having tried these out, do you have any questions, observations, or reactions?
Some are very clear, it goes smooth, and some
Yeah. Well, isn't that like, I mean, the first time that you heard about accessing cues? Well, of course. Who's this we?
No, we have no problem.
Yes. Of course, of course.
We don't deal with frogs.
Well,
You know, our culture has no frogs. You know that? We don't see frogs. Okay,
that's one way to eliminate the problem, yes. So the first time that you heard about accessing cues, and some people, they would go, so what color is the interior of your car? And they'd go, it'd be so obvious. And then somebody else, you'd say, and, what color was the bedroom painted when you were a teenager? And they go, blue. And you're going, oh, can you do that again? And they're both there. It was a matter of starting with what's easy to read, as you suggested, and then as you develop the ability, beginning to notice more. I'll tell you this, though, and this happens in any kind of modeling I've ever witnessed, is that when somebody models and they have a modeling tool, and you've been learning a number of them, is that they'll put on their glasses if they have them, and they'll lean forward just so they can compress their diaphragm and reduce the amount of oxygen to the brain. So they'll get tunnel vision, and they'll look right at the person's face. No, the person doesn't get scared necessarily, but they were looking right at the face, and the person will start talking, and they'll look it back and they'll go, I can't figure out if they're procedural or not. Meanwhile, right outside of this vision, they were going like this. The idea of softening the eyes, the idea of having paper to keep track of where you are, and the ability to look up and ask the question and really take a moment to let them do the nonverbals. Because you have the opportunity doing in person to remember, communication's redundant. So they could be doing it in the gestures. There was one group, we had with Paul, he actually gestured. He says, well, I don't want this, and I do want this. It was about the amounts of money. I don't want to have this much left over. I want to have like that. And it was like, not only that, it's a sequence. Away from, motivating, towards. So, but he didn't say a word about that. I mean, he just was saying, I don't want, it was just like.
We saw a similar thing with usually when you're talking about the past, the picture, away from within the past, and past, and towards within the future.
So you'd already established how she sorts time.
I checked.
Yeah, exactly. You'd already established how she sorts time, and then you could see that she put one here and one there. Oh, okay. He's a well-organized guy. I've watched him perform. He's very talented. I enjoyed that evening a lot with the music and the ancient stories. Yeah. So, and also as a performer, if you're well-organized, that you get better responses. People can understand what you're doing, even if they don't catch the word. Again, they can fill in because your gestures and the organization, what you do, supports all that. Any other comments or questions? Well, obviously, first level use would be modeling, would be finding how someone does something. Second use, very much enshrined and demonstrated in a number of ways in the work of Roger Bailey, Ross Stewart, and Shelley Rose Charvet, is as a way of determining a proper hire. In other words, you find a job, then you want to get people who make decisions and are motivated in ways that correspond to that kind of work. Does that make sense? For example, yesterday, we talked about making electricity and how much we want to make that same kind of electricity. We don't want to be making all sorts of new kinds. Well, of course we do, in labs. We want to make better batteries. Battery technology lags almost all the other electronic technologies. They finally are getting to work on the batteries, right? This is good. But we want them to get it figured out before they start putting it in our phones, right? So you've got difference moving to better than before, moving to we can produce the same high quality product again and again and again. Different people being in charge of those. In terms of motivation, this in particular, because it gets such a bad name, the towards away from, the direction of motivation, if you will, this person directed towards something or away from something, it's typically presented in the following way, that somebody is moving, say, away, this is the wolf at the door, that they're moving away from, say if this chair symbolizes it, moving away from something that is difficult, something that they don't want to be around. And if you think about physics for a moment, as you move farther away, what happens? The object gets smaller. And if you think about submodalities, if it gets smaller, it's less important. And if it's less important, as Jim just said, it's less motivating. So right away you can see something about someone who utilizes an away from, they have to have this get big enough and close enough in their mind to motivate them to reach threshold, to seek relief, release, relaxation. And when they get some relief, release, relaxation, they will stop because they feel better. Meanwhile, bum, 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 they go, oh, and then they do it again. So there's a periodicity very often to someone who predominantly uses an away from orientation in their strategy, if they don't manage it. I'm just saying if there's a predominance. Now, there's a very positive use of this relaxation response. This is exactly the feeling that people get when they solve something. Problem solvers. When people come to you and say, we got a problem, and you say to them, how are you going to handle it? And if they're problem solvers, they'll go, I'll work on it, and they'll be creative and use all the other strategies. And when they find something that works, they get to feel good. Their serotonin levels go up. And that motivates them to solve more problems. So there's really a positive utilization of this, even in the sense of careers for people. We enshrine in our society and in the business magazines and in the want ads the self-starting, go-getter. This is the person that's oriented towards excitation, towards movement. And we understand now about the idea of setting goals because they need some picture, whether they make a collage or draw it or hold it in their mind's eye, that gives them direction. If that picture is too small, too far away, or is obscured by current problems, what's going to happen to their motivation? Yeah, this is why people go to goal-setting seminars, because if you're toward-oriented, if you have this capacity, but you haven't got the pictures to put there, the voices to put there, then there's nothing sadder than watching a toward-oriented person who's lost their goals. Help, help, because there's no orientation. So you help them get a direction. Now the thing is that the closer they get, of course, the bigger it gets, the clearer it gets, and therefore the more motivating, the more compelling. And you have to, sometimes, if you're a professional coach, this is something to pay attention to, that it's in those last few steps that they need coaching not to leap and grab it and obscure the difficulties that would allow them to have it go forward. Because they think in terms of the goal and not in terms of the goal is the first step of another set of goals. Now that's very easy to handle with when they're getting closest goals. So what's the goal beyond that goal? And so now you begin to understand the reason for doing that. Because if you get the goal, once again, what do? They go, yeah, right. And they also may have leaped in that last bit to grab that goal and maybe stepped over people, maybe offended people, maybe forgot about something important. How many of you know about Osborne computers? That's right. Nobody knows. Well, a couple people. Osborne Computers was poised to be the laptop portable computer company. It was going to be the Dell of its time. And Osborne, named after the founder, had not only come out with a good machine at first that everybody went, this guy understands the technology. He had, in fact, developed an even better machine at a time when they were still pretty clunky. And he announced that the better machine was on the way, and everybody stopped buying the current machine, and they went out of business. He got close, and he started babbling about it, and that was that. That's right. Let's pause a moment for our friend. Yeah. So let's back here again. Actually, I should be back here so you can clip it. So, toward organizing us where we want to go, and very good for giving us directions. And this away from, really good for solving problems. Just as two examples. Let me do just one more here. In a business context, you're going to have people on both sides of this. You're going to have toward, you're going to have away from. What you want to do is sequence these people. In a meeting, you want to get your organization towards what you want, and when somebody goes, but that won't work, or we tried, and you go, okay, wait, here's the deal. We know that you can pick it apart, and in fact, we know that if it isn't picked apart before it gets out of this room, our competition will. So, I'm going to draw on all your resources, and I want you to give us every bit of how we could go for this, and I want you to be making notes, because I know you're good at this, at figuring out how it won't work, and what we need to get away from, what needs to be taken care of. And then when they're finished, then we're going to have you get up, and you're going to present that in order to really refine and put this in the cauldron and get down to some essence. And I'm going to give it back to you again, because of course it might be boiled down a little too much, but we'll be working with real substance then. We go back and forth that way so that we get something, we get out of here, we've already handled what our competition might do, at least as much as we'll be able to make it up, and we're pretty creative people. So a sequencing of this toward, then away from in business. Because you want to get something and then find out all the stuff that you take care of. In personal life, inside you, if you have a well-developed away from, you want to work on having away from then toward. You also want to begin to lower the threshold. Having worked in New York and the financial area, I know people who go, I eat stress, I live on stress. And then they got, the Maalox, and they're like, there are whole aisles in the grocery store I go down that I don't use. There's, what is this, heartburn? People have like continuous heartburn or something. They have whole aisles of this stuff. And what's going on is that the signal is too obvious. That is, the person's waiting until they get heartburn to move away from. Take a lesson, take a leaf from the book of Paul Tudor Jones. This is a millionaire trader, discretionary trader, and knows what he's doing. And what he says is, I won't take pain, he says. For him, if he's testing a market, it's like putting his foot in the water. He'll throw more thousands of dollars than probably most of us have to find out if the market will move. But for him, just a little bit. And if it doesn't move or it moves against him, he gets out. In other words, he's tuned his system to the point where he doesn't need, a smashing, crashing kind of physical response to let him know it's time to move. He's adjusted so that he keeps his well-being, financially, personally. And I recommend that as well. that you readjust. If you utilize it away from, this is very important. There's a lot of things that are worth moving away from in life. And you can have a more sensitive signal system that lets you know. It's like you get a little discomfort. You can begin to wonder about that. Instead of like, I can't stand it anymore, I'm out of here. And that's where people typically put their signal response. Even, for example, the restaurant example I gave the other day. You walk in the restaurant, it's lovely, it looks nice, but the noise is kind of, you know, and if that bothers you, then you've got to make a decision at that point. Go, is this the kind of experience I want to have? Because you're getting it away from there. And instead of going, well, I'll wait, and then it builds up. You get the difference. Now, you can use that earlier, more subtle signal. Will add years to your life and reduce your grocery bills as well.
It's almost like being really clear about your criteria before you make a decision.
It's more than that. You are clear about your criteria. It's just that people get the idea that I can take it. I'm no wuss. You know, and the thing is, it's like that environment may not have been designed for you. There are other places to go. Remember, in America, we vote with our money, number one. You start doing more of that, they'll open more places that you like. All right, a little bit about change processes. One of them already offered to you is, in order to become motivated more easily, add more criteria. As Tony Robbins would say, if you have enough reasons. The difficulty I find with that phrase is the ambiguity of it. Those reasons could be external. I could go, well, I should quit smoking because it's unhealthy and people don't like that I smoke, and I would be a better person or whatever. But they're social reasons. Actually, I don't care that it's unhealthy. I love the way it tastes. So that kind of thing, I continue, for example. Whereas if you personalize the criteria, you know, you look and say, well, I'm teaching my child this habit, and that matters to me, my values about what I teach my child. Then they've got a criteria that's going to make a difference to the person. And if they say, well, and I actually want to grow up and see my grandchildren, and I've seen the statistics, and I don't like betting against myself, kind of thing. And it may be that at some point it went from being glamorous as a teenager to go, you know, I'm a really clean person, and you know, and I like good smells and stuff, and this is just kind of a dirty habit. Now, these are criteria that I would say that I would embrace. It might be different for you. The idea is that when you help a person to add criteria for motivation, you want it to be stuff that matters to them. And of course, you can add it to the away from side, and you can add it to the towards side. See, there's a real benefit if you have an away from of adding criteria and lowering the threshold so you go through that quickly. That is, remember, the person already has a lot of distinctions here. To have them change those distinctions, that's too much to ask. But they can go right through it. They don't have to hang out there and feel bad. They can go, don't want this, want that. Instead of, don't want it, don't want it, don't want it, don't want it, and then moving. They could go right through the threshold. Then over here, if they're less developed in the toward, adding more criteria, and then helping them to make rich pictures of that criteria. Even have the sense of going out and feeling that fulfillment and then coming back and not having it. So they know it's there and they could have it. You can be building up a toward for the person. Does that make sense? Yes?
In ads, do we usually mix the towards and the away from? So we can
In advertising? Advertisings are very interesting because for the longest time, vacations were organized around get away from it all. So it was the idea of going to serotonin levels, going to relax, relief, release. You know, it was interesting that people would travel thousands of miles to change their state. But that's what they needed. The pictures just couldn't get small enough unless they crossed an ocean and had palm trees. On the other hand, now you're hearing a whole lot about adventure vacations, education vacations. Disney has a whole learning thing that you go there and you go on the rides, you have some fun, but you go and you learn some arts and you work with people in cinematography and lots of this kind of stuff going on now as the industries begin to acknowledge that people just don't want to go and activate their lizard brain. You know, sometimes they want to activate more of themselves and really go into another world. So you can notice shifts there, and you can notice that certain products appeal more to some people than to others. We look here on the decision factors, and the example there I gave before, I'm going to make very clear, product life cycle. Difference, early adopters. And then you get into the middle, and it becomes accepted, and then you need to improve it to set yourself apart from other products, and you say yours is better. And then pretty soon, it's just an appliance, where it's like, yeah, you just get a cell phone. You just get, you think a lot less about the brand. Oh, I need a computer. Yeah, this computer, that one's good. What's on sale? What's the price? What does the guy in the store think? So forth. And then, of course, then you can bring it around. Oh, it's got all this. It's completely different. Now it's got video cameras built in. It's new and improved. Now, this is so much a part of us that we don't realize. I'm going to give you a personal example. My business partner and I had actually convinced a training manager to bring in us to do this NLP meta-program stuff with their people, and he had to take it to his boss, who was running the company. The boss could be CEO. In this case, it was a president, mid-sized company. And the guy says, God, this is so new. It is so different. We have to have this. And we're going, okay, yes, we understand. Listen carefully. People become CEOs because they are bridging from tradition to the future. They're doing what works, and they want to do it better. Your boss is going to do comparisons. This is what most people that get to the high levels of companies do. They aren't sameness-oriented. They aren't completely difference-oriented because they want to take what works and make the economic engine work better, run faster. And the guy goes, but it's new. And we're going, yes, we know. That's why we're in it. And he went to his boss, and he told him how new and different it was. And his boss said, well, why don't we give it a couple of years? And if it's still around, we'll try it. We didn't. We went on and did some other stuff. Exactly. People live these. These are worlds of experience. That was my point in bringing that up. Any other questions? Let's move on to convincer strategies. Remember, decision generates option, chooses among them. Motivation is building up to a threshold of action. And then we go to convincer. Convincer strategies are, how do you know you've made a good decision? Why would this matter?
History. In your own personal history to determine whether it's successful.
Yeah, you'd know that after the decision. Didn't work out, so? Yes?
If you're selling something, you want to avoid buyer's remorse.
Okay, if you're selling something, you want to avoid buyer's remorse. How is that related to being convinced about something?
Well, say person comes in, they make a decision to buy something, they're motivated to do it, you're
Okay.
working all that through, they get home, and if they're not convinced, you'll probably get it back.
Okay. Those are actually different things, and I appreciate the ambiguity of the term. What usually happens with buyer's remorse, and we'll go more into this in advanced strategies, is that not all of the representational systems were activated. That somebody will see something and get a feeling about it and go, that looks great, and they'll take it home, and on the way home, they'll either hear an internal voice or walk through the door and hear an external voice going, you bought that? So you can cover that more by covering all the rep systems and by future pacing. The other meaning of conviction or convincer is an efficiency strategy. That is that you know the restaurant is good. You know the car brand is reliable. You know that you can always go to that restaurant. You know, don't tell that person any of your secrets. You know, in the middle of the night, you can call this other person and they'll be there for you. You've got enough examples of that. You've known the person enough time that you go, yeah, I'm convinced. I can put that one in the generalization box. I can put that one in the I know box. And I can do decisions about stuff I don't know about, like trying out the new restaurant or meeting a new person or trying a new kind of business idea.
Is that evidence testimony?
We'll go through each one of them. Aren't you? The principle is that this strategy is counting examples of criterial fulfillment or criterial violation. Even non-fulfillment, if you wish. So the restaurant, example. You go to a place, it's fabulous. You go back, it's fabulous. You go back, it's not quite as good, but I'll give it a chance. You go back, that's great again. You go, well, they're pretty reliable. You develop an idea about it. Just like you go to some place and it was noisy, and you go by and you just even look in the next time and go, nah, it's still the same kind of place. So you're applying criteria. Remember, all of these are happening. You're applying the criteria. Only this time, instead of motivating, you're establishing a generalization. And you're putting it in some box of, I don't want anything to deal with that, or they do what they do, or you can handle this in certain ways, or this is great, whatever your set of boxes are. When you do that, someone has to decide that. This is about the perceptual position of the decision maker. Perceptual positions are obviously really important to us because we have where we are in our body, and that's the orientation. So I'm in the center here. I'm in the self box on the mat here. And I have an attention direction. I'm looking to you. I'm looking to other. And I have who's the authority here? Is the authority over there, or is the authority here? My attention can be over there, and I can still be the authority. I can be dissociated. I can be out of my body, leaning back, observing myself and you and the situation. And where's the authority? I could still be the authority. You could be the authority. Remember, each of these is an independent variable from the other. So if I say, but enough about you, or rather I'd say, but enough about you, then is that about the authority? And the answer is it could be, but it's really about attention direction. In other words, I'm paying attention to myself, but I might not be the authority. It's a leaning in that direction, I'll tell you. But the idea is that that's different from who decides, I decide. The world is more divided up in this than you would imagine because I, having talked to you, realize that you decide for yourselves. Who decided to come to this course? Yeah. You can look around going, what a dumb question. I decided. Well, over in the Practitioner, there are people that were sent to the course. Why are you here? Talk to that person. They sent me. Yeah, right. The other person decided. Now, what's interesting is that this meta program actually gets built up with experience. That is that at first we don't know very much about something. Maybe we don't know much about food. Maybe you don't know much about how to drive a car or fix something. And we select somebody else as an authority, and we learn about that. And as we learn about that, we take on more and more. And after a while, we're going, yeah, I know what to do here. I'm an authority. I'll decide what we're doing. So we grow into being an authority. And even being highly authoritative, it's usually a good idea if you go into a new area of life, something you haven't studied before, to give over that authority in some way to the other person. Of course, there's a curious question, Ron, about how do you decide who is the authority? Well, I decide that they're going to be the authority. So again, it can layer fairly quickly. As this was designed and utilized in the original business context, they were trying to find out in a certain business who was making the decisions and then match that with the job. So that if you were in a job where somebody else needed to be the authority, you didn't put Ron there. You didn't put me there. It would be a mismatch for the job. We can utilize this in terms of modeling to find out in a certain skill area, what does a person do? Are they always the authority? Do they turn the authority over to somebody else? Curious thing about Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, the richest man in America. Everybody thinks, oh, Warren Buffett. Yes, and his little sidekick, Charlie Munger. Charlie Munger, he's not worth very much, I don't know, 250 million or something, But Charlie Munger and Warren talk almost every day about the markets and about what's going on. And you get a sense when you listen and you write and you check the language of Warren Buffett that he is not always the authority. That this goes back and forth. Right. You'd think being the richest man in the world. Right. Again, this is about dropping our prejudices and our biases and finding out what's there. You start reading Charlie Munger and you realize Mr. Munger has some opinions. They're both authorities in their areas, and they talk back and forth. And again, I just do that to alert you to the idea that it could be different than just one or the other. Convincer strategies, criterial evidence. This goes to what you were talking about. That's to say that if you are actually delivering a real thing in the world, that once you found out what the person's criteria is, you need to find out what BAK, what is what they see, what they hear, what they feel, that'll let them know that their criteria was fulfilled. Not your idea of what those are, their idea of what those are. Because people won't be convinced if they don't see the evidence. Now, this sounds very amorphous, but go right to the next one. Representational systems. What's that? That is the visual, the auditory, the kinesthetic, the olfactory, the gustatory. So you're deciding on a restaurant, whether it's good or not. What's your criterial evidence? And you go, well, it looks a certain way, certain criteria of how it looks, ambience, the sound, and I want the food, fresh, organic, whatever it is. And so you say, I want it to have an ambience. An ambience would be soft lights and soft music and comfortable seats. And what is it? And then how are you going to know about the food? And you're going to say, well, it looks fresh, it tastes fresh. And what we're getting at here is the representational system or systems that the person is ticking this off with. So they look in to the restaurant and they go, well, yeah, this looks really nice. So they see it. They go, wow, they really do great things here. They taste it. So then the next question becomes is, how many of those examples within what stretch of time does the person need to become convinced? That is to build the generalization. Or what stretch of time? Because people can do it with number or with time. And you'll notice there's a question there, and the question leans into number. Because if the person doesn't use number, they'll give you time. They'll just ignore what you said and tell you how it really works. So, for example, is there any place in town to go to eat that I ought to go to? Well, put that on tape rather than, is there a place they shouldn't go to? I mean, you all cook for yourselves. Well, I understand, but is there a place that's really worth going to? There's a sushi bar. And, well, okay, you don't like sushi. All right, so guess what? She's not going to test very much. You went, no, don't have much of that. We're right here. We'll say, so there's sushi bar. And you say this is a good sushi bar.
Absolutely.
Who decided this was a good sushi bar?
Yeah.
He goes, well,
Criteria, evidence.
now I can ask him just to gather some criteria now because I didn't do it before. How do you know it's good?
What, by checking those.
Checking what?
Well, checking the food.
Yeah.
And the whole setting, actually. It's food.
All right. And how many times, well, how did you check it?
Well, I went in, bought sushi, and that's it.
Now, this again, communication's redundant, but sometimes it's not redundant at the same time. Because I went in and checked it. We just showed you. You want to see it again? I went in and checked it. Ready? So he's letting us know in that way. And he also kind of looked around with his eyes. So he jumped back into the situation. So we could say, representational system? Well, he looked. I went in and checked it. How many times did you need to check it to be convinced that it was good? One time. Have you ever been back?
So far, not.
Then how do you know it's good? I know it. Now, this is actually not what I intended as an example, and it's a good example because you hear in the English language, at least, this phrase called third time's a charm. Once again, I'm just intrigued on how these things show up in language. Third time's a charm, meaning if you do something 3 times, if you test something 3 times, at least I'm taking from that there's some deeper sense. And a lot of people, they need 3 examples to find out if something is worthwhile, or 4 or 5 or 6, whatever it is, or a certain stretch of time. You know, is Heinrich trustworthy? A fellow in the room? He is. That was a good answer. He's right behind you there. If you had met him this morning and I asked you that question, what would be your reaction?
The first time?
The first time. So if you met him just hours ago. I don't know, right. And it's showing that, so there's something between a few hours and the months of time that's somewhere in there, or was it the number of times? So you know he's trustworthy. Is that because somebody told you, or did you decide that? All right, good, good. You've known him for a couple of years now. That's great. So you know he's trustworthy. What criteria did you use to decide that? You had experience with him. Okay. So what did you see? What did you hear? What did you feel that let you know that he was trustworthy? He walks his talk. Okay. How many times did he need to walk his talk for you to decide that? 3 times? So he walked his talk 3 times? Like he just came up in front of the room and walked it once, walked it twice, walked it 3 times, you decided? Maybe not. Yeah, see, I knew that by her nonverbals already, that she does, it was a week, it was 2 weeks. Because some people will do it with time, and some people will do it with number of examples. Now, some people will do 1 example and be convinced. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. One is if you have so much criteria at the front end that you don't let yourself become convinced of very much. When it meets your criteria, you're convinced. Also find, though, the people that try this strategy aren't convinced of very much, right? They never have, their criteria is almost never fulfilled. No, difficult to convince. Because they're testing for lots and lots and lots of criteria, and then when it passes, then they go, it's fine, you know. That's one way, that's a way to do it. So it's 1 time. And the other group of people, and for some reason they're always our managers, they're never convinced. You do all this work, you can come in the next day, and they're going, what? What? What have you done for me lately? Ooh. They have frequency. They've got time without a limit. They are never convinced. And before you think it's terrible to work for them, or you've already thought that, I think, is to imagine being a person who's never convinced. Did you buy the right shirt? Did you marry the right person? Are you doing what you really ought to be doing with your life? Are you living in a place that you're never convinced? Just a few people have this pattern, and it's worth noting because when you run into it, I'm going to give you something to do after the exercise that will allow you to answer this person in a way they'll go, oh, friend, and they'll want to get to know you because it's really difficult for them as much as they make life difficult for the people around them. This is a really fast elicitation. And again, I suggest you find a situation in which it works. You find something that's of a lower importance and something that you're convinced of. And you might also be curious, if you have the time, because I'm going to give you just a little time for this, is to find something that's on the other side. Because we are convinced both ways. We're convinced of the goodness, the greatness, the wonder, the desirability, the reliability, and all that. And we're also convinced when it's unreliable and we won't do it again and whatever else. Those same structure. You have encounters with it. Your criterial evidence is either met or violated. You do it through certain representational systems more than others. You have a number of examples or an amount of time, and boom, you have a conviction. All right? I would think so too. And it is called by people that came before me in NLP convincer strategies. But whether it's convincer or conviction, I'm wondering how soon you'll find yourself doing it. Just get into your groups and go.